Siguro kung ang kape guys kay may mo siyang political spectrum with uh, let's let's end this with a prayer. Good evening, people, animals, and alike. This is your co-host, Canar Dominic Acedo, and with me,
I'm Raven Jordan Castaneda, also your co-host, and
welcome to the Coffee Shop Intellectuals podcast. So, before starting off, guys, before starting off our very first episode or even our pilot, let's introduce ourselves as the hosts of this show. I'm Dominic, or Canar Dominic Acedo, as previously stated. Just call me Dominic for your ease of tongue or whatever. I'm from the University of the Immaculate Conception. I'm 19 years old and I'm also studying as a freshman under the psychology degree or course. How about you, Raven? Where are you from?
So my name is Raven Jordan Castaneda. I'm 19 years of age, and I study at Ateneo de Davao University. I study with the course of BS Biology, major in medicine. And I also, I think one important note about me is that I'm a practicing Catholic. So for you viewers who are somewhat iffy about the Catholic faith, perhaps you could learn some things about it here in the podcast. Perhaps.
Perhaps.
So that's me.
Maybe we will dabble on that later on as we continue.
Yeah.
So guys, since this is our very first podcast, we'd like to have the questions between ourselves. And also these questions would be the way or the gateway for you to know us deeper kay of course it's not simply kailan mo sa amua because of our name or sa mga asa mi nagskwela o sa mong ganahan. Pero pangagian nato na tanan. And firstly, I'd like to ask Raven, my co-host, how does your typical day go in this kind of situation?
Of course, because this is pandemic, so no school, dili ko gadtog eskwelahan or other places, although galaag usahay. But my typical day is I wake up at around 7 or 8 a.m. Depende kung I have a class scheduled at 7:40 in the morning. So if wala, I wake up at 8 if naa by 7 a.m. And then after that, kung unsay pwede mahimo, it's either if I have a class, I do my academic works. If wala and walay pending na academic works, then I proceed with reading books or writing essays or poems or anything that I'm interested in writing about. So basically I do that. I read in normal days without academic stuffs. I read at about 2 to 3 hours per day, and I also write at that rate. So mga 3 hours. So basically it's 6 hours of reading and writing every day, unless I have pending academic assignments or projects that I need to attend to. So in those cases, siguro I read at least 30 minutes to an hour, and depende if I still have time, I can write, but if wala, then no choice. But more priority ang academics. Pero kato it varies because karon pandemic wala jud kanang a strict schedule of my day. So kato, what about you, Ken?
Siguro since we have a very lax schedule in our classes, especially now that we're nearing the end, we're still having our classes, guys, as compared to Raven, as I think summer classes na lang. We only have 3 subjects, and then we have those subjects divided in a week, and usually we only have 2 to 3 hours of classes in a single day. So napakalaki ng oras na kung saan control ko. Usually I wake up at 8 a.m. or siguro 7:50 kung 8 a.m. yung classes. Tapos ang pinakaunang gawin, is mag-gargle tapos magtimpla ng kape. Hindi mawawala yung kape sa aming lifestyle. At hindi ako makakapag-aral ng maayos kung wala ang kape. Kaya ito talaga yung pinaka-importante. Pagkatapos niyan, of course, we'd have our classes and I'll give time after the synchronous periods, maybe 20 to 30 minutes to answer any TLAs, assignments, or activities. But after that, it's mostly free time. And maybe I spend my free time just now, currently now, ngayon lang, naging development is that I spend my free time watching Jordan Peterson's videos as a way for me to know more about my subject because other than a self-help maybe or siguro intellectual person that talks on the internet or who has a very large platform, Jordan Peterson is also a psychologist. So not only am I interested in his views but also in his lectures because he uploads his lectures. That's basically how I spend my day other than maybe planning out this podcast because I'd really like to be productive. I'd want to be productive and therefore I have this. Now, funnily enough, ang follow-up question unta nako kay Raven guys is that how or what does he spend time the most in his day? That's apparently answered. He spends it mostly siguro, klaro naman, reading, writing. But then maybe the deeper question is, unsa tong pinaka-importante or what's the most significant, let's say, action that you need to do in your day, Raven?
So basically as a Catholic, I pray every day and I hope that dili na ko na makalimutan ever. But aside from that, I think the most important thing that I do every day is to read. I think manifested man siya in the background. I have many books and some of those wala pa na ako nabasa. I haven't even opened yet. So perhaps backlog readings in terms sa ako ang books. So I need to really read and dili lang man po siya duty to read every day but it's also something that I'm passionate about. I love reading. So currently I read books about personalist philosophy, Wojtyła, Newman, contemporary thinkers like John Crosby and Rocco Bottiglione. So those philosophers, those thinkers that are in line with the personalist school of philosophy. So yun, I think that's the most important part of my day aside from prayer.
Oh, interestingly enough. So, as I have seen it, guys, I'm also a Catholic, but then hindi ko lang man-mention yung prayer or the act of praying because siguro the way I've prayed is that parang in a very personalized manner gani. Tapos I only give it maybe 5 or no, just a minute right after I wake up. And then I consider it as a very normal, maybe a very fluent part of my life. So hindi ko na na-mention and I'm sorry, maybe that's also one area that I could improve on. And for sure, we will talk about that, about our faith, and then maybe we'll talk about how I'd be better as a Catholic. And with the help of Raven, of course, kasi Raven is also very fond, let's say, of reading. What would you call those books, Rave? Kanang regarding Carol Wojtyła.
Karol Wojtyła's philosophical works and theological works, pero I think you mean theological works.
Yeah, maybe theological
like
texts. Or
yeah.
That's it. So I guess my next question would be hobbies, and I think that's already answered by Raven. Reading, writing, or even making himself better for his future. That's a very good hobby to have, and I hope I would assimilate that in my life. Kay I really need to be better in my life, and I'm trying. Pero grabe dyan na siya kalisod, labi na sa yung aning nga panahon. Now, let's move on to the next question for Raven again. What specific field of study are you most interested in? And is it aligned with the college course that you have right now? Kasi as what you've heard kanina guys, si Raven is BS Bio. Tama ba, Rave? BS Bio?
Yes.
BS Biology, pero grabe niya ka passionate, or maybe let's say he spends a lot of his time reading personalist ideologies, philosophy, or even theology in that sense. So, yes, Raven, talk to us.
So, the field or the school of thought that I associate myself with philosophically is the personalist philosophy. I have some books here. Siguro ipakita na ko. This book is written by John F. Crosby, a professor of philosophy at Franciscan University of Steubenville. It's a book about the personalism of John Henry Newman. John Henry Newman is a Catholic cardinal back in the 19th century. So he is considered as the precursor of the personalist philosophy. So kato, that's the field of thought that I associate myself with. It's basically about human persons and how humans as individual beings are whole in themselves and not merely parts of a certain whole. And there are other basic tenets as well, like in terms of the personalist philosophies tackling about the interiority of man, and they try to put it in relation or against the modern thought of subjectivism, like the Cartesian dictum cogito ergo sum. So they put it vis-a-vis the personalist thought that doesn't really enter or doesn't really accept the subjectivism of Descartes, but or of the followers of Descartes, but still accepts to an extent the fact that man has an interior life. So basically, that's how I understand the personalist school, and I think the person who introduced the personalist thought to me is no other than Karol Wojtyła or Pope John Paul II. Si Pope John Paul, I read his works I think back when I was 11th grade, but I seriously studied him 12th grade, so grade 12 na. And then from John Paul, I went back to Edith Stein, Dietrich von Hildebrand, or until John Henry Newman, but there are still a lot of writers na wala pa na ako na-acquaint with ang ilang version of personalism. So kato, so basically in general, that's about philosophy, but also aside from philosophy, I'm also interested in theology, because I, as a practicing Catholic, I am also trying to understand the doctrines, the precepts of the Catholic faith, and I think that's only possible when aside from prayer, communal prayer or personal prayers, you also try to study the doctrines by reading books about it. So these books here are all theological books. Some are Catholic spirituality, some about Catholic dogma. So basically, that's my interest, my field of interest lies. But that's not really my college course, because my course is biology, major in medicine.
Yes.
Pero so that's the reason why I have a divide. I divide in terms of my time for academics and my time for my other field of interest. Because in terms of academics, it's mostly about biology. I read or I study the basic subjects of biology are zoology, botany, systematics, and chemistry subjects like analytical chem and organic chemistry. For now, those were my subjects. So I read a lot about biology, but at the same time, I also read a lot about philosophy and theology. That's not to say, however, that I'm not interested in biology. I'm really interested in biology, especially in the field of medicine, since, of course, dili na ko siya kwaon na course if dili ko interested ana because doing something I'm not interested about is just wasting my time.
So imuha dyan ang decision, Rave. It's totally up to you. Dili siya ka nang coerced by parents maging BS Bio.
Yes.
So it's all you.
Uh,
So, ngano ka na, Rave? As I've heard, you're very passionate about theology, philosophy, and the human person, but then you went into a very scientific, let's say, very structured ka nang grabe ka rigid gani compared to what you have been interested in. Nganong BS Bio specifically? Why not siguro philosophy? Na may philosophy na course, ana.
So basically, I think part of the answer is for practical reasons, of course. Dili na mawala that there is a difference in terms of siguro not really sure if I can call it employability, but in terms of financial reasons, I think it's better to side with the medicine part. But aside from especially
ang demands
the demand
diba?
right now, but aside from that, I think siguro because I do not really see a divide or kanang a lack of unity among those fields, especially as to how I try to assimilate the ideas in those fields or the fields themselves in my own self. Although the disciplines or the way medicine is developed or the field of medicine is developed is highly scientific, and comparatively philosophy and theology are not scientific fields to say. They do not follow scientific method, so basically it's kind of freer. It's kind of a freer enterprise so it's somehow qualitative, more qualitative compared to the more quantitative and highly scientific field of biology and medicine. But nevertheless, even if there is a difference in terms of the method that they use, I think that with how I try to assimilate it within me, there is only one end, and I think that the end is the end or the finality of it, the purpose of all of these disciplines for me is for me to be as simply human as I could possibly be. So the reason, more principled reason why I took medicine, biology and medicine, the fields of biology and medicine as my I think you can call it more professional field of study. It's because I think it is in those areas that I could I could get or I could traverse, or how do you call it, or how do you term it? So it is in those areas that I could reach my end goal, which is to be as simply as human as I could possibly be. And the philosophy and the theology are somewhat complementary with the scientific part or the medicine part, because you could say that the philosophy and the philosophy and okay.
Kaya ang question po nako, nabay time nga mag-converge ang imuhang course ug imuhang interests during your siguro reflective sessions or kanang the way ka magsulat, since there's not really that much of a divide? Or siguro sa end goal lang sila naging parallel, naging corollary?
I think na kanang the way I assimilate those fields, the scientific fields in me is more on a pragmatic, practical aspect. By that I mean it is in medicine that I could see myself embodying the philosophical and theological ideas that I study. So it's more of a theoria praxis dimension wherein in theory I study the philosophical, I have the philosophical ideas on one hand, and theological ideas, of course, and on the other hand I have the practice of medicine, perhaps. So I have this dream before that now one day I could, if opportunity allows it, if that one day I could be a doctor without borders, or part of that group. So but I don't think that it's possible in my lifetime though. uh, pero nevertheless, the idea of being able to help people, motong point of my yung point why I entered into the field of medicine. So the philosophy and the theology is something that is supplementary and complementary to the practical field that I am currently taking. So kato.
Interesting kay bisan pag siguro from my normie point of view, I could see it as very two different things. Tapos as you've explained siguro, I can only see it as complementary when it comes to achieving your final goal or siguro your purpose or the thing that you'd want, which is to be simply human. Um, Interesting maybe because I have a completely different siguro way or landas kay what I'm passionate about and what I'm interested in and what's practical for me and the course that I've enrolled under are all under the same subject, which is psychology. So maybe I'm a very lucky person. I do not have such things to ponder upon kasi I really enjoy my subject in and of itself without even having to try to justify it. Pero I guess maybe siguro pod gwapo po na sa imo Harif kay in a sense like you've said you have on one hand the scientific or the quantitative way of dealing with life, and then you have the qualitative way, which is your philosophy and theology, and then finally you could combine those two to have a more holistic way of life. Siguro napaisip ako kasi gusto ko rin yan makita sa aking field. And maybe there's a sense of that qualitative and quantitative in psychology, especially that on one hand, we have the theories, we have the rigid notions and empirical, let's say, empirical data that helps you understand a person. But on the other hand, we also have the therapy or the psychotherapy into which it helps a person become better. Maybe in the future, I could see these two help me grow. Kay currently karon ang among subject lang under psychology is theories of personality, and so far we've barely touched the therapeutic side. We're mostly psychotherapeutic side, sorry. We've mostly been focusing under the notions, the theories, or the assumptions, the assertions of all these authors. I find it very interesting naman. But then again, as far as I can see, I could only observe myself in their theories and make it manifest in my behaviors. But, for example, kung may neurotic tendencies or may siguro may something that is tagilid na konti sa aking personality, I really don't know how to address it just yet. Maybe that's something that I'd like to improve on myself upon. I'm done with my questions, so maybe ayun na
So
Sito ka na, nag-segue na ko sa akong sarili.
so
Pakota na,
basically
sorry.
that is the perfect segue to my first question to you, Ken. So the question is, how did you become interested in the field of psychology? Because of course, as you mentioned, your course and your field of interest is the same, which is the field of psychology. Maybe you can talk about how in your high school years, we've been friends since 2014, I guess. You can talk about how your high school years affected or how those years help you become interested in the field of psychology, especially that I think prior to the years that we became close, I think you're more interested in another field, which is maybe journalism. I'm not sure if that's correct. So maybe you can.
Yeah, sure. I believe that's It's more of a creative photojournalism, writing poems, siguro artistic in a sense. Pero as I look back, let me take some time para i-break down Because as I've seen it, hindi siya yung parang grade 7, boom, gusto ko na maging psychologist. I think I had an incremental growth of perception in where I'd like to be in the future. So, let's say junior high school, grade 7 up to grade 9 maybe. Ang akong interest naga-float lang everywhere. Wala pa ko specific na field na ganahan or wala pa ko kanang very solid view of what I'd like to become. Basically, gana-explore lang nako tanan, and through that exploration, I've become a very curious person. And siguro ang side effect ato, grabe po na ako kachikador. Grabe kay ko makahiring og mga libak, mga issue, mga ingana. Or, siguro it's the other way around. Maybe it's because of that pagkachikador or pagka-chismoso. Siguro because of that pagka-chismoso o katong curiosity, I've become more curious about people. And because I've been curious on people, I'd like to make that into something that's practical or useful or even maybe helpful to my own life. Pero before that, balik ta sa grade 9. Kato na, wala pa ko'y idea kung usa kong buhaton. Grabe ko ka-impulsive nga tao. I'll just do what I want to do because for one, I have the resources, thankfully. And for the other, because I do not want to siguro restrict my life. But then, grade 10 and grade 11, between those years, I've really been starting to form, or sa my term mas naging solid na, mas naging specific na siguro ang akong view kung unsa akong gusto. I've enrolled under Humes or Humanities and Social Sciences, even if grabe kayo ang peer pressure that time nga mag-STEM ko. Kasi as far as I know guys, 99% sa akong classmates sa katong grade 10 nag-STEM sa UIC, katong nag-stay sa UIC nag-STEM sila, which means that they'll be classmates. Dako kayo ang peer pressure na mag-stay ko within a group that I'm familiar with, but I've chosen to pursue Humes because I've been really interested on how society works or how people work rather than just focusing on the sciences alone. So, let's say grade 11 up to early grade 12, ang ako ang area of field rather than naka-float lang, na siya sociology. And under sociology, nalay duha ka course na akong ginaay kung unsa akong gusto, either anthropology or psychology. Ang ako ang deciding factor kung asa ko maato sa duha is one, naaba sa UIC, kay for practical reasons as well, it's easy for, siguro, it's more accessible for me and my family to enroll under UIC. But other than that, I find it more helpful to myself if I'd understand myself more through the behavior of the individual, which is psychology. So that's one. Secondly, katong curiosity of behavior. Gusto na ko may balaan ako ang panglihok na ko impulsive, o sa tambal ani, o sa hinungdan. And I really love that satisfaction of siguro satiating your curiosity through the knowledge that psychology has given me. And lastly, I've also wanted to improve my interactions with other people. And how do I do that? Of course, by understanding myself and to an extent as well to understand people by the lens and the knowledge that this course is giving me right now. So that's basically the reasons why I've enrolled in psychology and why I'm very interested in psychology, Ray.
So you've mentioned about the field of psychology being able to probably may help you in terms of your impulsive tendencies or those somehow quote unquote neurotic parts or aspects of your personality which you've mentioned. So and the way psychologists approach behaviors or personalities, people's characteristics, for example, differs in the way that they view the field, or that basically differs from their psychologists differs in the way they approach behaviors based on their anthropologies. So maybe you can share about a particular psychological theory or school that you have a certain interest or more interest in,
Or
so
kanang
parang
inkling.
you have an inclination to probably study more about this particular field, or I mean a particular school, or you have a certain um feeling of kanang murag nag-identify ka with that particular school or that particular anthropology.
Oo, kanang marag mas gusto na ko siya i-approach or kanang mas menon. Okay, let's put it this way. First, let's try to contextualize kung unsa pa lang to among nagian o unsa among natun-an kay para to be more fair nganong kaniya kong gipili. Firstly, again, we've only tackled the theories, the notions, or kanang the way these theorists describe people. We have not tackled their psychotherapeutic processes or kung gaano ka-effective yung way nila na mag-conduct ng therapy. And then secondly, we have not yet touched the behaviorists, I think, because in psychology, guys, na sila tulo ka major schools. The psychoanalytics slash psychodynamic, kay si Freud lang tong psychoanalytic, tapos si Jung, si Adler, and si Horney, kay psychodynamic. Secondly is the behaviorists, wala pa naman nagyan. And during right now, kay na naman mi sa midterms, which approaching to finals na pod, we're studying about the humanists, basta the humanistic side of things, which is Carl Rogers. So far, kay Rogers pa lang may. So as you can see, siguro ang among na-tackle lang jud mostly is psychoanalytic and psychodynamic schools of thought under psychology. Thinking about those, we have Freud, Adler, Jung, and Karen Horney. Out of the four, I identify with Karen Horney the most. Maybe this will become more of a surprise sa mga tao nga, of course, mas ilado si Simon Freud, mas ilado si Carl Jung. The study of the unconscious of Freud, or the archetypes that Jung brings to the table, or maybe even Erik Erikson's stages of development, kay humanan na po mi ana. And tapos na pa rin pala kami kay Abraham Maslow, which is the hierarchy of needs. But then I still go back and revert to Karen Horney. Compared to Freud and the others, mubo lang kaayo ang part ni Karen Horney ug dali ra kayo na mo siya nahuman as discussion. Because maybe she focuses more on the clinical side of things, into where ang iyahang subjects lang, I believe, are all neurotic individuals. Maybe there are a few of her clients na dili necessarily neurotic, but for sure, most of her works are trying to know and understand more about neurotic individuals. The reason why I identify with Karen Horney more or the most compared to the others is maybe because ang first part sa iyang section sa libro, kay na ay 10 questions. Basta, you just answer whether it's true or false to yourself. Kanang murag tendencies lang or behavioral patterns na makita nimo sa imong kinabuhi. Wala ko'y awareness kung unsa to yung gina-point out or what does it mean for me to answer this true or false. But as I have read through the book, it has shown me that those 10 questions each adhere to a neurotic tendency. Or maybe a likelihood of me becoming neurotic, but not necessarily pasabot nga kung nakay nga to, neurotic na ka. For example, you have the compulsive need to stick to a powerful partner para you'll feel secure. Or you have this kind of need to feel superior, so you degrade others or you depreciate others' works, kana mga yung anak. But then maybe the reason why I'd like to know more about her is that I see a lot of tendencies and behavioral patterns within me that she has identified. But then again, wala pa'y therapy, wala pa'y kanang recovery or healing mechanisms, processes nga mong nagian. So I'm sticking more on knowing myself before trying to make myself better. And from what we've learned, the limited people and the limited time, kasi nga online classes, kasi tawagan na ka ng bitin kaayo. Grabe jud, gusto pa jud ko makatuon, but then because of the limited time and because of Karen Horney's effect and her notions manifesting in my behavior, I find her to be the person that I'd like to know more the most.
About Karen Horn, 'di ba, in the field of psychology, they have also a particular anthropology, like where their psychology is based. Like for example, Freud bases his psychology in more on a biological aspect. Like for example, the probably those neurotic tendencies are based on the biology of the person, but comparatively other psychologists say that it's more sociological, or it's more personal to the for the person. So on which side of or what is the anthropology from where Karen Horney's psychology is based? And probably also the question why you're more inclined to that particular anthropology.
So specifically nanay murag term sa mga guys kanang ginaingon ni Raven na kung asa sila gikan o kanong dira nagabase, for example si Freud kay biological tapos ang uban social. We call it concepts of humanity sa theories of personality, and within that concept of humanity they have different this or that's, and then for each theorist masulod yun na siya sa this or that. For example, I think we have 6, but we don't need to discuss the 6. We have the theorist who is either more focused on the conscious or the unconscious. We also have deterministic or maybe teleological. And lastly, we also have what Raven has mentioned, biological influences or social influences. Now, the thing that we need to understand is hindi siya black and white lang na purely resting on biological lang. Maybe other than Freud, kaya kani si Freud, grabe jud kayo siya ka pessimistic. Grabe kayo siya ka focused nga tungod lang sa imong biology or tungod lang ani nga unconscious wala na kay mabuhat, ingani na jud imong action sa imong life. So, Horney focused more on social influences. So basically, even though makita niya ang biological processes or let's say, she's not rejecting the biological influences and she's not denying that those exist, but her theory rests more on social influences. For example, what a child needs according to Horney at the very most or the peak level is love and security. And if you cannot give that love and security as a caregiver or maybe as a parent or as a mother, then the child would grow to have what she termed as basic anxiety. Into which that basic anxiety leads to an overcompensation of a person for him or her to siguro to get the love and security nga naglack sa iyaha during his or her childhood years. And through that way, as we can see, it's because of the parents and the caregivers that has become, or maybe that has made the child that way. So, yes, I could say that Karen Horney is more on the social influences rather than the biological. But for sure, dili siya black and white, guys. Dili siya black and white.
So, naabay ka ng particular reason why you feel an inclination more on this? Siguro, maingon na to that you have an inclination towards those sociological influences in terms of explaining the behavior of people. So, what are some of the reasons you have why you have why you have more inclination to the sociological influences?
Gusto dyan ni Raven, ilaglag akong sarili ba? Dari dyan na padulong. No. Ano lang guys, I want to be optimistic in trying to change myself, and with optimism comes with the social influences. The psychologists view it as this way. Kung nakay problema, and that problem is strictly biological, then there's a very little chance that you'd be able to recover or to change it or to fix it. And as for me, I have identified behavioral problems or maybe even neurotic tendencies in my life. And as a person, of course, I'd want to change that, and with that need or maybe with that desire for me to become better and to change, I need to believe, or at least sabay tama nga term, I need to situate my perception in a more positive light. And the way I do that is that by recognizing that all of these problems, or not really all, most of these problems that I'd want to fix are caused in a sociological or in a social manner. Kasi if that way, or in that way, mas dali siya ma-address. Mas dali siya ma-recover from. Maybe, let's talk about Carl Rogers. Kasi Carl Rogers, very humanistic siya. Let's go on a tangent for a little bit. Carl Rogers is more of a therapist than a theorist. Kay more on helping people jud siya, and he's a very positive person, and he also believes ang iyang concept of humanity is more on positive influence or unconditional, let me remember, bago na ako nagibasa, unconditional positive reinforcement. Basically, you give out altruistic, or sa may term na, you help the person in a social way, or you make the person better by being a good therapist, which means that there is a way for you to fix yourself without having to fall or even to regress into despair. Kaya kung isipon ako nga kanya kong mga problema, for example, my impulsiveness which leads to a lot of self-destructive tendencies in my life, kung maingon ko na ingrained lang is ako, then there's no way for me to even take the step of learning kung naabay chance na maayo ni. Although, that's not to say again, for example, sila Freud, dili pa sabot kay biological kayo si Freud, o pessimistic kayo siya, kay dili na makatabang ang iyang theories in trying to make oneself better. Maybe because kulang po akong knowledge regarding them on therapy. That's why I could not fully say or dili na ko sila fully ma-reject the biological theorists. But for now, yes, that's why I'm more of a social school of thought sa psychology.
Okay. So, it's very interesting for me na kanang you're into a kanang more on social aspect of the psychology. Kay I think that's also where perhaps we have a convergence in terms of more on a principle in a principle level sa ato ang field of interest, because in the personalist philosophy, I think it's very clear in the writing of Karol Wojtyła when he tried to differentiate between what happened to man and the man acts, wherein it doesn't it's not necessary that what happens to man or what man is from the beginning of his being, which is where the biological takes place, na mo na ang mag-determine to everything that man becomes. Because for the personalist, specifically for Wojtyła, he believes that man as a human person is a self-determining subject. So meaning that man creates, man participates in the creation of himself. I think that that's a more appropriate thing, or appropriate way of saying it. So I think that that's where there is a convergence between your psychology and my field of philosophy, or the philosophy that I acquaint myself with. So kato, I think in the future podcast episodes na to, we're going to tackle more deeply into those stuffs, into the personalist philosophy, to the
Yes,
psychology,
sure.
especially of Karen or I. Pero I think it's 45 minutes past since we started the episode. So I think maybe we could discuss something about more related about the podcast itself. So
Yes. So from Raven and me, let's now move on to why we've made this podcast.
So I think the first question that I'm hello. So the first question that I want to ask is, we've been discussing the possibility of making a podcast such as this particular podcast. In our past conversations back in high school, probably 2 or 3 years ago, so why only now did we attempt to do this. In your perspective, why only now? If the possibility or the proposal to make this podcast has been existing or has been for
Has
a
been
long
existing
period of
for a
time
long
already.
time. Uh, I'd also like to hear your answer, Rave, pero I think mine is shorter and let's take my perspective first. So when you say a podcast, guys, or let's take a step back, what a podcast does is that it posts in the internet the discussions or maybe the conversation of people. And this conversation between two individuals or more has been is or no rather it's not a new thing between me and Raven. We have been having meaningful conversations or maybe even to the point of intellectual discussions, but we've never really thought about posting it. So what's really special about this podcast and why only now? Firstly, when you say you'll make a podcast, you'll of course post it in the internet. And through the internet, you'd have a larger audience and have a larger, broader reach than just the two of you or the three of you, depending kung pila mo ka buo ka storya. That's one. And with that broadening of audience, of course, we'd attract more, or maybe we'd get more perspective on the things that we've been talking about. Those people that have more knowledge, maybe, or who are more informed, or who are more adept on the fields that we're talking, would be able to help us in our discussions and in the future, of course, help us become better persons. So, yun yung parang gusto namin na mangyari, or gusto ko siguro from my perspective, gusto kong mangyari as a result or as a product of us having these meaningful conversations. But on the second level, when you post something on the internet, of course, there comes the backlash or the chances of being humiliated. Or siguro mapakaulawan ka kay mali mong ginaingon. Or just katawan ka kay nga di ka mo storya. So of course, there's risks in posting this podcast in the internet. But why? Maybe, why now siguro, let's say, siguro naabot ko sa point or I've come to the point in my life where improving myself through the benefits that this podcast could bring me is more important than the shame or the potential humiliation that we would take in doing this podcast. So that's the answer to why now. For doing the podcast, yun yung former na sinabi ko. Let's put it that way na lang. Ikaw, Rave, nganong karon lang ta nagsugod o nganong karon lang ta na-decide yun nga mag-record, mag-edit?
I think that
podcast.
I can only answer in terms of my own perspective into why we're making a podcast because on the second part of the question on why now, I think it relies more heavily on you since I'm the one who proposed this 2 or 3 years ago. So
Si Raven ditong insistent kaysa mga barkada guys. Mag-podcast ta.
And to be honest, most of my friends, I have meaningful conversations with most of my friends, not only with Kennard, also with Hench, Hench Pipito or Ryle Domina and Tom Rica. Also with some of our mentors, teachers like Sir Kim Borda, Sir Kiko Canono, Sir Vincent Gayan. But so I always tell my friends na what about posting this online so that we can maybe have a marag check on kanang other people, especially more competent people can check on how well we understand certain concepts, especially me that I'm always introducing new philosophical concepts and ideas and try to discuss it with my friends. So motong that's the reason why I want to make a podcast. Probably when I try to introduce it to Kennard and Ryle and Tom also before. Pero anyway, the reason why I wanted to make this podcast and the reason why Kennard and I are making it, probably because we want to maybe make ideas, especially philosophical, theological, psychological, or even other ideas in the fields of science, especially biology and uh, other fields of science more understandable to the masses, because it I think that the reason why people are hesitant to engage in dialogues about serious topics, especially philosophy or even psychology, is because there is a fear of being wrong, and there is a fear of um, having other people uh, point out a certain aspect of your lifestyle that is probably, number one, probably consistent with your philosophy, but your philosophy is wrong, or number two, your way of life or your way of living is contradictory to your own philosophy of life, or the way or your own philosophy. So I think that those fears are really are always there, will always be there, even to me, even to Kennard probably. But nevertheless, I think it is only with initiating a conversation or a dialogue that we're able to correct our beliefs, but also probably we can notice that our way of life is contradictory to our philosophy. But secondly, maybe we know that our way of life contradicts our philosophy, and only because someone pointed it out that we are now more willing to change the way we live, or maybe adjust our philosophy depending on which aspect of our life are we willing to give up. So that's part of it, and I think that when we allow people to discuss, I think it normalizes thinking, especially in terms of
Another thing, Rave, I think another appealing aspect of this podcast is that we're just a couple of
Yeah.
19-year-old Bisaya students in Davao that's talking about this. Kay, as far as I know, tanan ako nakitaan podcast is usually old people or maybe people in their middle ages that are professionals, that are very adept at their field. So maybe by giving you guys a new perspective, or an amateur's perspective maybe, or just a freshman's perspective on these things, maybe you'd be more encouraged to talk to your friends or to have meaningful conversations without having to need siguro a very specific and credible academic background. Because as far as I can remember, ingana po daw ako ang sentiments. Mahadlok ko mga istorya o ingani nga mga butang kay kulangan ko knowledge or wala kay ko nahibalaan. Siguro until now nga na-convinced ako ni Raven. So, mo na to siya.
So, Kato, I think it normalizes thinking, and when thinking is normalized, so of course we try to learn how to write, how to read seriously, how to speak more cautiously, and how to listen more attentively than before. And with that, there is also the normalization of progress, of accepting, and not only accepting but exposing your ideas, and risking the possibility of being wrong, being called out by other people who are more probably who has more more authority in terms of the field that you're talking about, but not really in terms of being cancelled, because I'm not really I don't really like the concept of cancel culture. I don't like the cancel culture because it's not normalizing progress. Rather, it's only normalizing. I think it's only normalizing the shutting down of ideas, and maybe true that it's good because you call out people, but you're not engaging into a dialogue with them. But secondly,
So that's one step further.
so comparatively, when we risk, and also it creates a culture of fear that you should not risk exposing yourself, exposing your ideas, because people will cancel you eventually if there is a statement that you say that is not in line with the popular idea of the popular opinion of the time. So, and I think that's also the reason why even popular podcasters, YouTubers like Joe Rogan or Dave Rubin have been cancelled, even if they are by the Democrats in the United States, even if they are Democrats themselves, because there are some of the ideas that Joe Rogan and Dave Rubin hold. They have ideas that they hold which is counter, probably counter cultural to the, or counter narrative to the narrative that the most of the Democrats most of the Democrats hold in their society. So and so that's the reason why I'm not really a fan of cancel culture. So ours is in more of trying to make people comfortable about exposing themselves and their ideas to the possibility of being wrong and the possibility of being corrected by more more competent people in the field, but also not only with the competent people, but there are also some people who probably like us, teenagers or even young people who have an idea about a certain matter that they want to present, and because of that we can create a dialogue with them, so that there will be an enrichment of our understanding, not only of other people's ideas but of the ideas that we currently hold, because there are aspects of our ideas that we can only see, or that we can only understand vis-a-vis the ideas or the responses of other people about it. So but basically the bottom line is that we try to normalize learning, and we try to normalize discussion that allows us to learn. So I hope that even if there will be some people out there probably listening to this podcast who do not really accept, or who holds a different idea about certain topics than us, they will not probably cancel us out or shut the possibility of dialogue, and creates the and probably there will be a lot of those instances that we'll have a dialogue, even probably with some people who are more hostile, even if they do indeed engage in a dialogue, but the way they dialogue, or the way that they converse is more hostile, or in a heated manner. But I hope that they will be a minority of people soon enough. And by the way, so you mentioned that there are only most of the people who do podcasts are people in their 30s or 40s probably. Pero I know of a certain YouTuber or probably podcaster. His YouTube is Cosmic Skeptic. He's an atheist. I forgot his name. I forgot his name, but he's known as the Cosmic Skeptic. He studied in, I think, Oxford or Cambridge. I'm not sure. He studied theology in London. But he was, I think, 17 when he started a YouTube channel, the Cosmic Skeptic, where he posted contents about why he disagrees with pastors in YouTube, or probably William Lane Craig, whom he had a conversation once in a podcast. Yeah, Alex O'Connor. And he also, I think, engaged in a dialogue with Bishop Barron in I forgot what podcast it was. Pero yun, he was 17 when he started posting videos about his atheist views, and he admitted in a more recent video that there are some ideas that he held before in terms of his atheism that he doesn't already hold today, because he thinks that those are stupid ideas, even if they try to push the atheist viewpoint. But he thinks that those are stupid ideas, so he tried to drop them. But the point is, we see in this atheist the progress of his ideas, and the ideas that he holds, and we see the willingness to expose himself by saying that I was wrong before, and this is now my new view on the matter, because now I have more knowledge about this certain subject matter, and those information allowed me, or maybe um, forced me to change my understanding on this certain matter. So probably we'll see more of a progress in Alex O'Connor. Although he is an atheist, I see that he is a serious atheist, merely dismissing um, not merely dismissing not merely dismissing the idea of a god or religion, for example, but really seeking the truth, and because of that he studied theology. So not really the same of most social media atheists, na like for example, we know, I think, can you also see posts of our batchmates in our high school, na they talk about why they don't believe in God, and they present some stupid arguments that they post in social media. So yun, I think that in Alex O'Connor we see a more of serious thinker, serious atheist, and yeah, and I think that it's also one of the reason why we create this podcast, so that, for example, in my ideas in religion, especially in the Catholic faith, that there might be a growing understanding of the faith, and a growing knowledge in terms of my reasons in believing in the Catholic faith. Or I'm not really sure if someone can persuade me out of the faith, but at least someone can point out.
But there's always that.
At least there might be a possibility, but more than that, I think it's more probable that someone can point out flaws in my understanding of the Catholic faith, and in terms of how I see the Catholic faith vis-a-vis other propositions like the atheist position. So with that, I think it's more exciting in my part, because I can defend my faith here in the podcast as well, if there are people who are going to ask about it. And as
It also adheres to your final goal, di ba? To be simply
so
human.
yeah, in terms, I think that's also the reason why I started my Simply Human blog, because I want people to engage in a dialogue with me, although I'm posting blogs at a very, very slow rate and an inconsistent rate as well. The last time I posted in the blog was, I think, March or April. I'm not sure when it was. Pero kato, the point of the blog is to engage also in a dialogue with other people, and that's also the point of this podcast, even if I probably hold some ideas, some concepts in philosophy that aren't really complete, or aren't really as refined as other professional philosophers understand it. So I hope that this will be a learning platform of learning as well. So Ken, maybe we can talk about why this podcast is named as Coffee Shop Intellectuals.
It stems, maybe on one part, it stems from us being, so may tawag rin, connoisseur or enthusiast, coffee enthusiast. Coffee has been a very big part of our lives siguro, and we find it very delectable to have conversations while drinking coffee, or the other way around. To drink coffee while having these meaningful conversations. And as far as I can remember, the most meaningful conversations we've had, there's always a coffee on the table in front of us. And maybe siguro sa Drave ka, remember ka atong Yunlin ba to? There's a small milk tea house, yeah, in front of our school back in senior high school, and although it's not really a place or a coffee shop in its sense, they also sell coffee, and by that alone we have the essence of a coffee. So maybe that's why it's Coffee Shop Intellectuals. And there's also the wordplay of CSI, the crime scene investigation, siguro din dapat nangikan kay Raven nga nung na-specific abbreviation nga CSI, Coffee Shop Intellectuals Crime Scene Investigation. So it all stems from coffee, kape. I have my mug here. Show yours, Raven.
Actually, urot na akong kape. I think 30 minutes into the conversation, wala na ko'y kape. Pero, so, I think I started thinking about what the podcast name could possibly be katong propose na ko siya to you na maghimo tag podcast, and it was inspired actually with by the intellectual dark web, the IDW, a term coined by Eric Weinstein. They are a group of people who are interested in making serious dialogues, and they come from different backgrounds, religious or political views. So Sam Harris is an atheist, Ben Shapiro is an Orthodox Jew, Jordan Peterson is we could say that he's a pseudo-religious person who sees religion in a more Jungian way. Brett Weinstein believes that religion is metaphorically true but literally false. Pero Sam Harris is really an anti-religion. He's known for his anti-Islam positions, or I'm not sure if you can call it anti-Islam, but I think he's more he's more cautious of the ideas of Islam than in other cultures, but in other religions. But still, he's an atheist and probably an anti-religion. You could call him that. Pero these people also politically diverse, like Sam Harris and Joe Rogan is from the left. Jordan Peterson is probably a mild conservative. Also, Ben Shapiro is a Republican in United States. Douglas Murray is a conservative from London. Nevertheless, these people are serious thinkers who love to engage in a meaningful dialogue with each other. And motong naging motong naging inspiration as well. And I got the term coffee shop intellectuals when I was reading, I think, the Story of Philosophy in a book by James Garvey and Jeremy Stangroom. I'm not sure if that was the book I was reading. Pero I read a term that was coined coffee shop philosophers, and it meant people who do philosophy but not in a professional way. So these people are more like reading philosophy by themselves but not really studying it in the university. So kato, and because of that, I thought of coffee shop intellectuals, not philosophers, because we come from different fields. Yuken is a psychologist, or soon to be psychologist,
soon to be.
I'm a soon to be doctor of medicine, I hope, in the soon future. So it's not really about philosophy mainly, but about an intellectual dialogue of a sort. So it's more of coffee shop intellectuals, and also we're not yet academicians. I'm not even sure if I'm going to teach in a university after I graduate medicine. But nevertheless, it's an intellectual dialogue, and we're not professional academicians. We're not full-time researchers, for instance. So it's more of a serious but not too serious na professional extent. So it's more of a serious endeavor but not really professional. So it's more of a like the coffee shop philosopher, where the coffee shop intellectuals, and I also like the letters na CSI, because it's catchy, I think. especially that CSI. So like you've already mentioned, it's
Associated na siya sa isa ka popular na ano.
so kato it's really catchy, the coffee shop intellectuals, and the meaning is there. So kato, that's my reason why I propose the coffee shop intellectuals as a name. But also true is our hobby for drinking coffee when we talk about, when we have deep conversations. Like I remember before, back in senior high school, we stay at the research office or in the lobby, drinking coffee while talking about philosophy or other topics, pondering life in general. Also, even we stay at a gasoline station na naman sila shop dito. They also sell coffee. So we sometimes stay there until 7, or I think at most 8, to and still the same thing, we talk about life in general. So I think every instance that we talk about life or any serious meaningful conversations, we have coffee at our table. So tama to siya. And I'm not sure. I think I really do hope that people will love drinking coffee while while discussing, or while they have meaningful conversations. Wala may coffee products, but and we're not promoting any coffee products, but we love coffee in general, except those coffee that have too much cream and milk. so
Hello, inom na lang daw mo gatas kung ganahan mo na. Ay na lang daw
so
mo
we have a
pagkape.
common friend, Ronaldin Chan, who loves coffee with, I think, 80% milk.
Hello, Ronaldin, we're calling you out.
With 80% milk. Pero kato, that's her personal taste, preference. Pero in our case, we prefer stronger coffee than those milkier, creamier coffee that they advertise in the television. So kato.
Siguro kung ang kape guys kay may mo siyang political spectrum with with the left being katong pinakadaghan og nahalo, and with the right or the conservative katong the purest form of coffee, siguro you could say that I'm more of a center right person, closer to a conservative. The lesser the mix, the better. But of course, there's a pinch of sugar in it as well, kay pait na po kayo kung dito na ka sa extreme right. Lisod na po kayo yung kinabuhi. Una, kung mato mo ka sa extreme left, mawala na tong sense of coffeeness. Kay daghan na kayong nahalo. Mawala na tong hierarchy, mawala na tong organization of structure nila sa pagkakape.
Walang essence of a coffee.
Oo, nawala ang coffeeness of a coffee.
And you start deconstructing what coffee means. so pero kato, coffee really is a vital part of our the instance of our conversation. So kato, that's the reason why it's called coffee shop intellectuals. And what are our future plans about this podcast, para kabalos pod sila unsang unsang i-expect from this podcast?
Siguro ano siya, Ray, for me, I find this podcast as a platform kung asa, of course, between the two of us, Raven and I, Raven is usually the one who proposes ideas or new ideas to be talked about. But of course, in the future, we'd like to have these ideas processed or siguro manifested in our experiences. For example, maybe Raven could give a theological notion kung asa pwede na ako makita akong sarili, or makita na whole life, or even in the future pa jud, if this podcast, God may help us, becomes better or proliferates, we could also have other people talk about or talk with us regarding the notions or the fields of interests that we'd like to have meaningful conversations upon. So In the future, guys, or siguro let's say in the nearest future, para mas concrete siya, we'll stay on the lane of psychology, theology, and philosophy, as these lanes are the lanes that we know the most as non-academicians, non-professionals, but very serious people in thinking and having meaningful conversations. So stay tuned sa kana nga subjects maybe. Ikaw, Rave. Sa'yo mong gusto.
So, kato, I like the idea of having people in other people in the podcast pod. So, maybe they could talk about, maybe we could ask professionals, talk about their certain field of study. Like we know, teachers, close teachers na to from senior high school who really take their field of study seriously. Also, we have a close teacher who had we could call it a change of heart, change of the field that he is interested in. So he was and probably is a serious philosopher, but now he entered the world of business. So I'm interested, if I hope that he will share his story here in the podcast soon.
Bitaw. I also want to know that, Rave. This is
Because
an open
there are
invitation.
also many people, because there are also many people, many classmates of ours, batchmates who are asking wondering why the sudden change, and probably what's the backstory behind it, what's the inspiration, or what's his future plans, or how he sees his career going in years or in the future. So kato, I hope that he will share. Also, I'm thinking of another teacher, close teacher, who is really good at the field of research, especially in terms of sociology. So I hope he could share his story as well on why he became interested in research, and probably talk about myths of research, like what are the misconception of most students about research, and probably some tips about research as well. So I hope that they will visit and come talk here in
And
our podcast.
yung teacher, the other teacher as well, Rave, who's a previous seminarian, who taught us very well in the fields of morality and Christian
morality
theology.
So maybe he can talk about, I was thinking, maybe he could talk about his journey as a seminarian, then out of seminary, about his life as a teacher, but also his position in terms of why he believes in God and why he believes particularly the Catholic God. So I think that would be an interesting discussion as well.
So, of course, guys, let us know in the comments as well kung saan dun sa mga na-mention namin na fields yung most interested kayo, para of course, it would be appropriate to our audience and we'd have a more specific field. Kaya napakarami yung nasabi namin. So, saan lang kayo most interested din?
So we may know, so that we will also know in what order are we going to post those discussions as well. So ito. So we're in.
Let us also know, guys, kung ingani ba nga long form podcast ang mas maayo sa inyo, ha? Or mas gusto ba ninyo patason or pa-move on? Or kung gusto tong mas ganahan ninyo to engage with us more.
And maybe if you have suggestions about how to make this podcast better, especially that this is the first episode and we really don't know anything about podcast, in terms of setup, in terms of the setup, in terms of other possible tips on how to better this podcast as well. So kato, we're in the 1 hour and 20 minute mark sa akong time. Maybe we could have any concluding remarks starting sa imo, Ken.
Okay, Ray. there's really only one thing that I'd want to say, and I hope that this podcast will reach a lot of people who are like us, or people who are interested in meaningful conversations that have been siguro hiding or that reluctant to enter such conversations because of specific obstacles maybe. So it's really for the benefit of the society or for the people around us or those people who would be touched with this podcast. I hope or we make this podcast specifically, I don't know about Raven, but I make this podcast for the reason of reaching other people as well. So that's basically why also I've wanted this podcast to happen. Ikaw, Rave?
Um, I think na there is a really a lack of serious conversation happening around us, and I really hope that we could help increase the number of meaningful conversations, and maybe also promote serious fields or serious concepts like philosophical ideas or psychological concepts to assist people in the way that they think, or the objects of their thoughts, or katong opinions nila, their opinions really in itself, because I really think that it although most people believe that philosophy is not something that has an effect on them, but if you take a look at it in a more objective way and a more in a more realistic way, even that particular idea is a form of philosophy as well. So I think that no one can really move out of the realm of philosophy if you take a look at it more deep, if you take a look at their opinions, their lives more deeply. And I think that it also helps, or having a conversation about serious concepts, serious ideas also helps give meaning to life and work, and our work.
That's the most yes, that's the most important thing I've learned or I've gained from being a friend of Raven, guys. When I look back, maybe I could say that my life was really superficial or kanang dili siya grounded to specific concepts. Kanang I think I knew myself, but then there really are specific concepts and ideas that help you materialize who you are and help you know who you are and what kind of steps you need to take for you to become a better person. That's what philosophy, Raven, and these discussions have given me, and hopefully that also becomes a part of you as well.
Siguro nalay ka ng I will give an example of it na we have a common friend, I will not mention his name. I think you know this story as well, Ken, na he's more of a, we could call him unstable, not really to a large extent, but he has
Unusual, maybe.
he has some episodes of maybe sadness. I cannot really call it depression because I'm not a clinician, but I know that sometimes he feels like he feels sad, and maybe that maybe because also of the difficulty of knowing himself as well, or of creating an understanding of himself. So with certain conversations, we also have conversations before this podcast was made. We have serious conversations in Discord, for instance, and because of those conversations and because of the ideas that we discuss, he told me once that he only when he learned about the idea of Karl Wojtyła on work, on labor, where Wojtyła talks about work not only changing the world around you, but also changing yourself in the process. Did his work, or did he see a sort of meaning in his work, whatever that work may be? And I hope that in this time where I think people think that meaning is a luxury, or even even most or even some people think that having a meaningful life is a privilege. I think that even with a serious thinking, or hearing discussions about certain concepts, then you may realize that maybe there is some sort of a meaning in your life, and from that realization that there may be some meaning in your life, then you can create a probably a more profound understanding or more profound realization of meaning in your life. So I hope that this podcast reach people, not only that they become interested in the discussions, but also helps them find meaning in their life, because only with the concepts that we talk here, we talk about in this we will talk about in this podcast soon. Those are actually certain languages that we can use to identify areas of our lives that we never could have identified if we do not know, or we were not introduced to certain concepts and ideas. So like for example, to in the case of our friend, he probably would not realize that his work has some sort of meaning in it had he not encountered the idea of Carol Wojtyła about the purpose and the effects of work. So I hope that our conversations and the ideas presented here serve other people the same way as it served our friend. So kato, not only in terms of really normalizing dialogue, but also in terms of the generation of meaning in our peers and all or all the people who will listen in this podcast. So kato, mato ako ang hope about
Final.
this. So kato ang ano,
Yes.
how do we
And hopefully guys, as you can see, wala dyan ka malone sa on pag-end. So, let's let's end this with a prayer. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to our very first podcast, and I hope you've enjoyed this journey. Again, like this video, comment suggestions, subscribe if you want more, and tell us what you'd want. Thank you guys. Thank you so much. This is Coffee Shop Intellectual, Raven and Kennard, or Dominic and Jard, signing off. Bye!